Right, today I am in London with Richard Hayler, who is the MD of IBAS, the Independent Betting Adjudication Service. Thanks very much for agreeing to talk to us today, Richard.
No problem.
You're also described as an alternative dispute resolution, so basically you upscale existing disputes between punters and bookmakers. Firstly, why did you apply for a role that you knew would be confrontational every day?
Good question. First of all, I didn't think it'd be confrontational every day, and it isn't every day, but it can be some days. I applied for it because I love betting. I like gambling, but I love betting. And I'd worked in the greyhound racing industry and the horse racing industry before that. I know a fair bit about it. I like doing it myself. And the idea of trying to apply the principles of finding a fair resolution to problems that I'd used in the regulation of those sports to betting situations just really appealed. And I found it an interesting job from day one. Some frustrating situations, some rewarding ones, some sort of confusing ones, but always interesting. And I think that's reflected in our office. We have very few people who start work here and leave because it's just a job that changes every day and is always interesting.
Okay, you say you enjoy betting, etc. Can you give us a little bit about your background, just briefly, what you've done up to this point?
Okay, well, I haven't worked in the betting industry itself, but as I say, I worked in horse and greyhound racing. I always had an interest in betting. I think it's a bit genetic. Both my brothers are involved in racing or betting as well, and again, I've had an interest from a very young age. A bit of a horse owner. Greyhound owner, but mainly enjoying trying to get an edge against bookmakers and enjoying bookmakers trying to get an edge against me.
Okay, so what would be, there's a panel that meets, I understand, so how often would that panel meet and what would be the process when you're sorting out disputes?
Well, there's a panel of 16 adjudicators. There are 10 who've been in place for quite a while. We've appointed 6 new adjudicators and we'll be formally announcing those in the very near future. And what happens is when a case arrives, so somebody who's got a complaint against their bookmaker or gambling operator, they fill a form in, normally on our website, but they can do it by post as well. It arrives here. One of our case managers looks at the dispute, first thing to work out whether it's something we can look at, because there are some types of dispute we can't look at for various reasons, and I can talk about those if you want, but if they can't look at it, they let the person know as soon as they can. And if we can look at it, they'll then bring together all the evidence they think that our adjudicators need to reach an informed and balanced decision. So that might mean going back to the person who had the complaint and asking for information about what they did and what they've already said and any records they have of emails with the company. And from the company, it might be about looking at the betting records, about the price histories of the thing they've bet on, or about their rules, or whatever it might be that's caused them to take the stance they've taken. When that file is put together, it goes to a number of panellists. It can be 1 or 2 if it's a very simple case, or a very repetitive case. We've had lots of similar cases. It might be 5 or 6 initially if it's quite a complex one. And then if it gets really difficult, if the panel just can't decide between them, there's no consensus being reached, and we put it on an agenda for a full meeting, up to 16 people sat around a long table, arguing, pointing, occasionally screaming, and trying to get a fair outcome. And in the end, if there's no consensus view reached on a case, it comes down to a majority vote of the panellists who are there, and some cases get really close sometimes.
Okay, I'm intrigued just briefly, what sort of disputes can't you deal with?
Well, if there's, for example, an allegation of criminality, so somebody says that someone's hacked my account, say, or someone's stolen my money and bet with it and they want their money back. Some issues that relate to problem gambling, where people are saying they think the company's allowed them to gamble and the company's acted irresponsibly and they want their money back. There are some cases where we can look at that, but mostly we'd say that's a regulatory issue and they'd have to go to the Gambling Commission or the other appropriate regulator if it's from overseas to say they think the company has been irresponsible in the way they've treated that person. But we try to reach an adjudication on every case that we can.
Okay, and what would be the most common dispute you deal with?
It varies from time to time. So the big ones at the moment would be about the clarity of what betting markets mean. So these are where companies are trying to be innovative and come up with new betting ideas, but haven't really spelt out what the actual detailed terms of bet settlement are. Frequently, it's pricing errors, and we found that the more markets companies offer, the more pricing errors there are. I suppose you might say that's just a natural progression, but sometimes we feel that companies are churning out so much in play betting material that they're not really monitoring whether the prices are accurate, and then are later making more adjustments than they did in the past, and citing what were once called palpable error rules or obvious error rules. And then a big trend recently has been from people who possibly don't understand or haven't had properly explained how the cash out mechanism works in bets, or cash in as some people call it. And that's recently in particular, we've had a lot of people who are frustrated that they're trying to cash out an accumulator that's been successful to a certain point, and the company is not offering them a value for it, and they believe that the company has said they're entitled to it, they can expect an offer at all times, but they're not being offered one, and they think it's unfair that they're being denied that. So it moves in trends. I think if you'd asked me a year ago, I'd have said the biggest issue was about unclear terms in bonus offers and welcome promotions, but as you might have known, there's been quite a lot of activity done by the Competition and Markets Authority looking into that, and the new requirements that have been published by the Gambling Commission for Companies have helped cut down the number of cases of that nature, so that's quite good to see.
So how many disputes did you deal with last year?
I think we just had just over 8,000 requests for adjudication, and some of those, as I say, we weren't able to look at. We publish on our website in our annual report the results of cases from UK citizens, because we are a UK regulated dispute resolution service. But of the 8,000, it's about 5,600 UK to the rest from around the world, and we get requests for adjudication from probably every country at some point or another.
Okay, but would you consider that to be a high figure or a low figure? Because I'm thinking 8,000 with the millions of transactions that take place every week or every month. What would your opinion of that be? Is it high or low?
It's tricky to say, because there isn't much to measure it against. I think if you look at other industries that have their own dispute resolution services or ombudsman, it's probably about normal. If you compared it to, say, number of complaints about train companies or insurance providers or furniture delivery companies, they've all got their own ombudsman bodies, and you can compare those figures to other industries. But I think sometimes the way that gambling is portrayed externally as being untrustworthy is over exaggerated, and that's something I've talked about in various presentations I've given, and I've written about in this year's annual report that we published on our website. There are issues, and hopefully we're helping to deal with them. Hopefully the Gambling Commission is dealing with them. But I reject the idea that gambling today is untrustworthy, and it's been portrayed that way in lots of quarters in Parliament and in the media in some places. I think that if you place a bet on something, you go back when that bet wins, and you completely expect to get the winnings that you expect to get. You'd be shocked if you didn't get paid out on the winning bet in the way you understood it to be paid out. And that, for me, looks more like a generally trustworthy industry than a generally untrustworthy one. But I think the problem is that some trends, particularly relating to bonuses and special offers and account management issues and multiple account accusations and so on, have created the issue that trust is lower than it really is. But I think for the average person placing the average bet, I think they can completely expect to come back and get paid out just the way they would if their selection wins.
Okay, it's interesting you talking there about you put a bet on, and then when it wins you expect to go and get paid. There's been at least one incident I've been aware of recently where a punter has asked his friend to put a bet on for him because he can no longer get his bets on because he's been restricted, and then by association the bookmakers refused to pay and just voided the bets and give him his money back. Now, what's the opinion on that sort of situation? It's always been like there's always been like odds to services. I'll give you a tip, you put a tenner on for me, pay me at the price. What have things changed as far as the rules go there?
Well, they probably have, because the industry's changed. From our point of view, we know it's something that vexes lots of people, and I think there's some pretty strong arguments that have been made by individual punters about whether the way that they've been treated in those circumstances is being handled fairly and evenly. The way that we would look at it would be to start off with the company's rules or terms, and the question that's most often asked in those situations is it fair for a company to have a rule that says if you open an online betting account with us, you agree to be the only person who funds it, uses it and bets through it? And our panel have looked at that question quite a few times in different circumstances, and I think their view is that that is a reasonable thing for a company to say. Now, from there, you go on to the different question of what happens if somebody doesn't adhere to that, and if there's clear evidence presented by a company to us that somebody has then passed their account to somebody else and they've used their computer or their iPhone or whatever it might be to place bets through that account, and the company is saying they want to enforce that rule, I think in most cases, unless there was a particular special reason why that was an unfair position for them to take, we'd say that was a reasonable rule for them to enforce. But the question that gets asked in reverse is, well, what would happen if those bets had lost? Would the company have made those same links? Would they have detected that account had been shared with somebody else? Would that person have got a refund? And it's an area that I think will be explored in further depth in the coming months. I think most people will be aware there's a quite high profile court case that's likely to come to public attention in the next few months. I know it's on the radar of the Gambling Commission as a regulatory issue, and I think there's a lot more to be debated about it. I know this will sound like passing the buck, but I do think it is something that it's a question that deserves either regulatory or legal attention. I don't think it's the sort of thing that an alternative dispute resolution body should be saying this practice is acceptable or unacceptable. So for the time being, I think we have to sit back and see what developments occur in regulation or in law, and maybe there are court cases on the horizon that will help us to understand the approach we should be taking to those sort of disputes.
So do you think that the bookmakers have created that environment for themselves? Because years ago, only the very best punters would have been restricted or even had their accounts closed, and now you've only got to be moderately successful, just break even, and you're in that bracket. So what were your feelings about that?
Well, I think to some extent they have created a problem by the way that accounts have been promoted and the way that welcome bonuses have been offered and proliferated, and what you now have is situations where companies are, with one hand, trying to encourage customers in by offering them free credit up front, and on the other hand, feverishly policing that, trying to make sure that somebody who's had one offer isn't entitled to another offer. And I think in the creation of that mechanism, they've applied that to people who bet from day to day, and they're possibly looking more closely than they ought to sometimes at people's betting patterns and spotting things that might not always be there. I think the issue alongside that is, and this is just through anecdotal evidence I've encountered, is that I think there are examples of people who work in trading rooms who respond a bit impulsively and perhaps too quickly to issues that maybe they've created for themselves. So to give an example, what I mean by that, a firm fails to suspend a betting market on a horse race, and the race goes off, and it's a 6-furlong sprint, and 20 people who happen to be logged on at the time see the markets left open. They're watching on whatever racing channel showing it live. Horse X is about to win. They're 16-1. They have a 5 or 10 or £500, whatever it might be on the horse. Then after the race, the trader who's managing that market sees what they've done, they see the 16 people who've done what they've done and say, right, boom, 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 down the list, cutting them back to closing their account, no bet odds guarantee, whatever it might be. Now, I don't know how often that happens, but I get the impression that sort of stuff does happen. And one of the things that I've suggested to the industry in the opportunities I've had to talk to representatives about it is that there should at very least be some sort of independent cooling off period within that company structure where somebody else who's not so emotionally involved with whatever the incident is, the palpable error, the offer, whatever it might be, can look at it and say, look, on balance, this person's account, they're just a customer who wins sometimes, loses sometimes. So you've gone in a bit too hard there. So ignore that recommendation. I'm not sure that control is in place in many companies. So I think sometimes people would have just one bet after a period of up and down betting that will trigger some kind of an alert internally, and that alone will be the cause that loses them their bet odds guarantee or whatever it might be, their right to offers, their ability to get the stakes when they want to get. And I think companies can overreact sometimes to that. But I should say that IBAS isn't empowered to make decisions on that. We're not empowered, I don't think, unless the Gambling Commission or other authorities tell us otherwise, to start telling companies you must lay a certain bet to a certain person. I think a bookmaker has always had the right to refuse a bet, and I don't think it's unlawful for them to retain that. So as much as it's frustrating for punters to not be able to get the bets on they want, I don't think it's an issue that IBAS can adjudicate that, yes, retrospectively they should have that bet reinstated, or even look into the future, they should be allowed to have their bet odds guarantee back. I think that has to remain the company's prerogative, again, until any kind of regulatory changes come about. But I do think companies could look at it more closely than they do. And I'm encouraged to see that there is more punter-bookmaker dialogue going on about that now. And hopefully companies will increasingly be willing to look at correspondence from people who have had their accounts restricted or lost offers, to be able to review whether that was done fairly and whether there might be scope to give them a second chance or whatever it might be.